Hi again, everyone. Good evening. We're about to get started. Okay. So good evening, everyone. And thank you all for being here. I am very excited to be here Thursday, July 20th. This is the final of our town halls this week. I'm excited not only because there's so many people in the house, but this is actually, as of tomorrow, I will cease to see my own face and hear my own voice over and over and over and over again on the radio. So thank goodness for that. But my name is Jean-Pierre Oriol. I am the Commissioner for the Department of Planning and Natural Resources, and thank you all for our second of our town hall meetings on the Virgin Islands Comprehensive Land and Water Use Plan. I will just be doing some very brief opening here. I will be turning it over to our partners, the Horsley Witten Group, who will take you through this evening and what we will be doing. Because, as I said, this is our second town hall meeting. So in the first town hall meeting, what we did is we asked everyone to take a sort of a 30,000-foot level look and tell us what it is that was important to you, what was value of most to you, and what we must preserve. And now we're going down just a little bit after compiling all of those comments and probably at a 15,000-foot level. And so now what you'll see is these boards where all of these comments that we received over the last several months have been compiled in what we're calling formative issues. And so we're looking now at some of the policy statements and what we were going to do next. So again, we're not at the specific land use areas per se yet, but we're working our way through that process. I think Horsley Witten is doing a fantastic job in guiding us through that to where we want to go. So before I end, I just want to say again, thank you for being here. Thank you to the Horsley Witten Group. I would like to acknowledge my staff that will also be helping facilitate this evening. And thank you to the NT Media Group, who has made sure that I certainly appeared so often that everybody said, man, I need to come here and see what's going on tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff. And he will take us through the first round here. So thank you everyone again for being here this evening.
Thank you, Commissioner. So again, my name is Jeff Davis with the Horsley Witten Group, and it is my honor to be back here on St. Croix. Really am humbled to be before you. For those of you who are here in March, I want to reiterate that we are not here to tell you what to do. We've been here to listen, and I hope that everything that we have heard you see reflected in these boards and in the plan as it moves forward. Really are here with a sense of humility, and that you entrusted us with this work. So I just wanted to take a few minutes before we dive into this content directly into the mic. Oh. Sorry, folks. I'm going to talk more directly into the mic so the people at home can hear me too. So just wanted to take a few minutes to give a little refresher on what the comprehensive plan is for those of you who may not have been at our first meeting. Next slide, please. So first of all, a lot of you will have heard the term CLWUP. That acronym has been used to describe the Comprehensive Land and Water Use Plan for some time now. It's a mouthful. No one really knew how to say it. I was calling it Cool Whip. I don't know that that really caught on. So we're just going to simply refer to it as the comp plan for short. So when you hear people talk about the comp plan, we're talking about the Comprehensive Land and Water Use Plan. Next slide, please. All right, so again, for those of you who are not at our first meeting, you should know that this has been going on for a long time. The territory has been working on Comprehensive Land and Water Use Plan literally for the last 50 years. And there have been many efforts over that time to develop and adopt this plan. And I asked this question before in March, and I want to ask it again, how many of you in the room were part of any of the past efforts to develop and adopt a comp plan for the territory? Raise your hands high. That's a lot of you. Look around. So first of all, a round of applause to everyone for coming back and trying again. This really is amazing. It shows your dedication to the community and to getting this done this time. So for those of you who have not been involved, just a refresher on what the comp plan is. It is a shared vision for the USVI's future and a roadmap that guides how we get there. So in short, it should help the territory make decisions about what new development looks like and where it is, how we balance competing uses for our waters, such as boating, fishing, and swimming, how we protect environmentally sensitive areas, our waters, our coastlines, and our historic sites, prioritizing future investments in community services and infrastructure that promote fairness and equity. So making sure that everything that the territory is investing in is having a positive impact for everyone who lives here. Making sure that land and water use decision-making process is fair, equitable, and consistent. We've heard that one a lot, that even more than the actual actions in this plan, it's really important that there is a good, clear, consistent decision-making process for land use. You'll also see on the left of this screen our timeline. So as the commissioner mentioned, we have started with a baseline report, getting data on existing conditions throughout the territory. Based on everything that we have heard from the public over the last several months, we've developed the formative issues and guiding principles and policy directions, which my colleague Nate will be describing in greater detail. So that's where we are today. And moving forward, we'll really, as the commissioner mentioned, be diving into the specific land use policy for each of the islands. So you'll see on St. Thomas and St. John, it was pointed out, well, this is still very general. I'm not seeing a whole lot that's specific to where I live. And we're getting there. So we're starting with these principles that really should be overarching throughout the territory. And from here on out, we start trying to dive into the details. I want to say a few other things about the comp plan. It does cover a lot of topics, but primarily in regard to how those topics impact land and water use and management. So for example, and I think I used this example last time, we will deal with things like healthcare and education, but we're really dealing with the facilities for healthcare and our specific schools, where we locate them and how people are physically able to access them. Also, it's important to note that the comp plan is not a change in the territory's land use and zoning laws. That comes next. This plan is a framework for future legislation. It's a framework for how we all make decisions together. Next slide, please. So, a little bit more about the formative issues. So in the law that mandates this plan, there are certain things that the plan has to do, but we really wanted to build the plan around what was most important to Virgin Islanders and what was most important to all of you. So we started, as the commissioner mentioned, by listening to you about what are the things you want to preserve, the things you want to improve, the things you want to transform. We heard from literally hundreds of people throughout the territory and had really some tremendous conversations. At the same time, acknowledging that we're not starting from scratch. There are a lot of existing plans, adopted plans, that are important to incorporate into this one. There have been a lot of efforts in the past to create this plan, and even though they were not adopted, there's a lot of good information and a lot of good work that went into those. So we acknowledge that we're not starting from scratch, and we're taking all of that information into account. So all of those things together have been grouped into what we're calling formative issues. They're just really our big picture goals for the plan. And again, tonight we hope that you will recognize the things that you've said on these boards, and that you will see these things reflected as what you and your neighbors care most about. Also want to take a minute to thank our working group on St. Croix. We have a group of 40 people who volunteered their time to review materials in advance, provide us advice, help get the word out about events like this. So if anyone from the working group is here, if you could raise your hand and just give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for your volunteerism. Next slide, please. All right, so we heard a lot of great things from you all. We did do a public survey online between our last visit here and today. I will say it was an abysmal turnout. We're not going to lie about that. There were only 30 responses. So we want to get more responses in the future, but we're really thrilled that you're all here tonight. I will say that of those 30 responses, they were very substantive, very positive, and really reflective of a lot of the common ideas that we had already heard. So it made us feel like, you know, it's a small sample size, but felt like we were on the right track. Next slide, please. So what we heard from the working groups when they reviewed this initially, first and foremost, that we should be doing more on-the-ground engagement. So events like tonight, where neighbors get to talk to neighbors and discuss these issues amongst themselves. Also, that there really needs to be a focus on people, culture, and heritage. So all of this matters in relation to how it impacts people, first and foremost. Also, an emphasis on government transparency and accountability, that without that, the best laid plan is going to come to nothing if it's not going to be implemented. And part of that is capacity. So the capacity of government agencies and government employees to do the jobs that they're charged to do. Next slide, please. Next, more opportunities for local decision making. And as you might imagine, this was really prominent on St. John, but it was a theme throughout the territory that there be more opportunities for people to have conversations and to make decisions locally. There are a number of specific environmental concerns and an emphasis on regeneration, sustainability, both for conservation of natural resources and being more sustainable in the development that we do. And then finally, more of an emphasis on water uses. It was felt that we had more emphasis on land use than water use, and there was a desire to see that more prominently focused on in the plan. And I will note that the formative issues in their full draft can all be found on the project website. Next slide, please. All right, so to that issue of government accountability and transparency, because that came up a lot. We heard a lot of really good ideas from people about, again, not being so much concerned about the specific actions that are taken, but the process for how decisions are made together. So we acknowledge that this plan won't solve everyone's problems. You know, it is a plan, but we do hope that it can help establish a better framework for the community to make decisions together. Next slide, please. So how do you do that? So based on, again, what we've heard from you all and how you would like things to work and function differently in the territory, came up with a list of principles on how we can make change together. And we hope this resonates with you and would love to get your feedback tonight on this. So first of all, that the territory needs to set goals before it makes any action, decision, policy. What are you trying to achieve? That has to be very clearly laid out. Next, collect data. You're not going to know if you're achieving what you want to achieve unless you're tracking data and you know where you've started and where you're going. Third, to be accountable. So once you've said this is what we want to do and we've got the data to know whether or not we're doing it, track that. Hold yourself accountable. Are you heading towards the goal that you wanted to get to? And if not, admit it and try new things and make adjustments. But hold yourself accountable to what you promised. Next, act equitably. So that is, to boil that down, really always asking who is benefiting from this decision, who is not benefiting from this decision. And we really want to make sure that everyone in the community is benefiting from the actions that the government takes. Next, mind the future. So we know there are a lot of issues outside. They're sort of outside our control in a lot of ways. We see increased storms, intensity and frequency. We're seeing this horrible drought, heat waves, and other issues that are going to be a challenge for future generations. And we need to take all of those things into consideration in the decisions that we're making today. And lastly, and this is something that we heard from a lot of people, that you feel that USVI does the same thing over and over and over again, sort of looking for a different result. And you want people to be able to embrace change and to try new ideas. And we think you can do that so long as you set your goals, collect your data, and hold yourself accountable. Next slide, please. So when we were discussing this with the working groups, I said, you know what, it would be great to give an example. What would this look like in the real world? So we were looking through the news and saw that the governor has recently proposed a bill that would help rehabilitate derelict and abandoned properties, but with the goal of making sure that the current owners of those properties maintain their ownership in the long term. So is this a good idea? How will we know? You have to try it and find out. Next slide, please. So theoretically, if we're going to evaluate an idea like this, how would we do it? First of all, setting your goals. What are you trying to accomplish? 1, we want fixed buildings. 2, we want to make sure that people are staying in their homes, that they're maintaining their properties in the long term. All right, then set goals for that. Let's say you want to make sure a 50% reduction in derelict buildings within 10 years. And let's say you want at least 90% of the property owners who are involved in this program to maintain ownership of their homes. Well, how do you do that? You have to collect data. You have to know where you started, how many derelict homes are there in the community. You need to track those investments over time and track property owner data. Next slide, please. And how do we hold ourselves accountable? We have to ask ourselves, is it working? How many buildings have been renovated? Has it been just a handful? Has it been successful? And the number of people who are actually able to maintain ownership. And if we're not hitting our targets, why not? It has to be okay to learn, to change, to fail, so long as you keep trying and adjusting. Next, act equitably. Who's benefiting? We have to track demographic data for that to know. Are there different outcomes based on people's income? If you're lower income versus higher income, are there different outcomes based on people's race? If so, that is not acceptable, and we have to go back to the drawing board and see what's causing those differerences. Next slide, please. Mind the future. Are we having benefits for future generations? Are we building back better, weatherproofing these homes, making them more energy efficient, making them more resilient to storms in the future? Are they going to be available for our children and our grandchildren? And then back to our initial point, embracing change. Will this work? You won't know until you try, but so long as you hold yourself accountable and track that data, you should be able to accomplish a lot of things, try new things, and make some good progress. And again, we hope on top of that, that having principles like this also provides a platform for communication and discussion among the community so that more people have a say in these decisions moving forward. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Nate, who's going to get into the details of the boards that you see here tonight.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. So as Jeff said, I'm going to walk you through what you'll maybe have taken a look at when you first came in tonight, if you had an opportunity. And if you didn't have an opportunity, or if you did, we'll have more as the evening goes on. But I sort of wanted to introduce this material to you so you get a sense of what you're looking at. As Jeff mentioned, and as the commissioner mentions, you know, we have our formative issues, which is that sort of high level. These are the 10 sort of buckets of ideas, important ideas that we thought we heard as we've been doing our work, as we've been hearing from the community, as we've been doing our research, as we've been talking to different agencies. This is what we think is going to be the kind of the framework of how we move forward. At least that's what we're proposing for now. And within that, we're again trying to sort of crystallize those ideas into what we're calling guiding principles. So these are the 1 or 2 sentence pieces of material that should really speak concisely, briefly, and in a manner that we can understand for each one of these 10 pieces. Again, think about where we're headed with this. We're going to write a piece of legislation. We are going to write something that the legislature is going to have to consider, and that you are going to tell the legislature they need to adopt. And so the language that we use has to get right to the point and has to be clear. We're not all the way there now, but we're getting there again, step by step, and we're, taking you along with us on this process. So the guiding principles, as I mentioned, are 1 to 2 sentences apiece. You'll see those on the boards as you look around. And they also show some policy directions. So the guiding principle says this is what we think is important. This is what we want to achieve. This is our goal. Think about what Jeff just talked about. And then these policy directions are going to start to answer the question, well, how do we get there? What do we need to do to achieve this vision moving forward? Next slide, please. Beneath that, again, because we want to give you sort of a taste of how this comes together, we've got some working strategies. A lot of you folks came to the first meeting saying, I know what needs to be done. These are the strategies you need to put. We need to move forward. So we took those in our notes and we sort of parked those in a place, and now we're starting to pull them out. And we're starting to show how they're organized under these different ideas. So you'll see some of the strategies that maybe some of you brought to these meetings in the beginning, and that list is going to grow. And what you see tonight is not exhaustive by any means. It's not the full range of what we heard. It's a taste, again, of the kinds of strategies that we're going to be talking about more and more as we go forward. These come from existing plans. These come from your conversations. And they're specific actions that individuals and agencies can take. Next slide, please. So our first guiding principle is to govern effectively. In a lot of places where we talk about land use or marine area use, people get right to the activities and the what kind of land uses are going to go there or what can't go there or what areas need to preserve. When we came to the U.S. Virgin Islands and we started talking to people right out of the gate, it was about how decisions are made, about how things are administered, how things are enforced, how rules are changed, and who has that power and who has that authority. So decisions related to land and water use should be based on sound planning and enforced by agencies who have adequate resources to do that. That's our first guiding principle. And what does that mean? So, for example, one policy direction is that you need the staffing and the training to get that done. The government has to have fully staffed, fully trained folks who are qualified to do this work. On the other end of that, you have to have accountability. One of the really critical core pieces to this plan that needs to be built in is that our decision makers have to be accountable to the plan. If the plan gets adopted and thrown in a drawer and it never gets used again, then really all of this work is for naught, right? And so we build in mechanisms that say, for example, if someone comes in and petitions for a zoning change, then the folks making that decision have to show, and the petitioner has to demonstrate that it's supported by this plan. And if it's not, then maybe we have to go back and either amend the plan or simply say, no, it's not in the plan. It was not part of this process that we did, taking a year and a half to put this together. Hold them accountable to that plan to make those kinds of decisions. Next slide, please. Celebrating our history and our culture. Restoring, healing, preserving, and cultivating awareness of cultural resources and land and water use policy is critical to the economic success of the U.S. Virgin Islands and the cultural experience of future generations. This is what we thought we heard from you. What does that look like in policy? Well, for example, mindful development. Folks are going to redevelop a site or develop a new site that has yet to break ground. You have to ensure that that development accounts for and, where possible, enhances the cultural resources, including using traditional and culturally recognized designs in buildings and site design. Site design. Reinvesting in our history. One of the things that we heard over and over again about folks who own historically significant property is they can't access the capital to reinvest in that property, to bring it back to life, to bring it back to its former, cultural significance. If you can't access that capital, if there's a government program, for example, that says, sure, I think we have $50,000 for you, but you need to bring 20 to the table in order to get access to that capital, that's not doing a lot of people a lot of good. They can't get there. So that's an example of something that needs to change going forward. Next slide, please. Providing homes for everybody. I think it's no news to folks here that housing is not affordable in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So a diverse and abundant supply of safe and healthy homes is fundamental to the economic, social, and environmental prosperity of the U.S. Virgin Islands. What does that mean in policy? Well, for example, flexible zoning that can accommodate the needs of folks in their homes over a lifetime or over a number of lifetimes, over generations. If a couple is fortunate enough to buy a home and move in, or they inherit it from their parents, that home needs to be able to account for their lifestyle as a young couple. They are lucky enough to have children in that home has to accommodate that. Those children move on to college, the home has to accommodate that shift, and maybe the parents need additional revenue. Maybe they need to be able to rent. Maybe they need to have a home-based business in order to take on those added expenses. This couple ages, continues on, ages into disability perhaps. Maybe their grandkids want to move home and help them out. Can their home accommodate that? If zoning is rigid and tight and envisions only one living situation, then that's a barrier to people just living, again, one generation to the next and building wealth and building community within their home. Probate reform was another thing that we heard a lot about. If homes sit in probate, you cannot invest, right? It's that simple. And so probate reform is going to be important moving forward to make sure our community stays stable and intact and people can thrive within their homes. Next slide, please. Connecting people and commerce and places, getting around. The transportation system should serve the needs of all residents and visitors with different options for getting around, and it should connect land and water uses in a safe, efficient, and environmentally sensitive way. We need to find ways to just make sure people can get from point A to point B. Young children, folks who are able and willing to maybe ride bikes or walk to where they want to go, and other folks who may have some challenges getting around in their mobility. Maybe they're in a wheelchair, maybe they're a little bit older, maybe they've got an injury, maybe they've got some different needs that make it a little bit harder for them to get around. We need to be able to accommodate that, again, to build community. So examples of that, very simply investing in sidewalks and paths that make it easier and safer to walk between these important points. Parks, schools, grocery stores, neighborhoods. And then sustainable roadway design, right? Roads are important for our transportation system and getting around, but they're also one of the most dominant sources of pollution in any outdoor environment. The rainwater that falls on roadways picks up oil and sediment and metals and bacteria, and if those roads aren't properly designed, that water shoots straight into your ocean where you have mangroves and seagrass and coral and people swimming, all of those things you need to protect. Roadway design is critical to preserving those resources. Speaking of resources, next slide please. Protecting land and water through policies that must reflect USVI's natural sources are central to local cultural identity here. You are tied to your land, you are tied to your water use in a cultural way that is very powerful. Your local and cultural identity, public health, ecological systems, and economic well-being. From a policy perspective, some of this comes down to development review. If folks are going to build, they need to build well. They need to build in a way that minimizes the harm and in some cases can actually create a net benefit. If you're rebuilding old sites that were designed way before people were even thinking about these sorts of environmental problems, you can build those back in a way that creates an environmental benefit. Groundwater protection. We'll talk perhaps a little bit later about, there's an exciting discussion on this island about agriculture that's happening. But what I've seen in legislative testimony and what we've read about in the agricultural plan, the water issue is sort of foundation to this. If you are going to move agriculture forward in some of the visionary ways that we're hearing you all talk about, the water piece is central to that. That's sort of a critical path issue. Next slide, please. With improving and maintaining quality of life, we start to get into the types of services that you have access to. So your policy should support a sustainable system of amenities and services that foster civic responsibility, public health equity, treating those that are most vulnerable and providing them with the services they need, opportunities for physical activity, keeping people healthy, and community pride. Be proud of where you are. Keep it nice, keep it clean, invest, keep investing. So from a policy perspective, access to healthy facilities, simply identifying where these facilities need to be located and which neighborhoods are underserved and need better access to health care, whether it be clinics or hospitals, dental care, whatever that may be. And public shoreline and water access, ensuring that that is maintained. What do we need to do to make sure that the access is for U.S. Virgin Island residents? Next slide, please. Mitigating the impacts of climate change. We're feeling it now. This has been a really hot visit, let me tell you, that we've had over the past week. And we were almost relieved to hear from all the folks who are living here that you thought it was really hot too. So it was unusual, I think. We're seeing some of the hazy weather and the heat and the humidity. We're feeling it. So the USVI must adopt land and water use policies that anticipate more impacts of our changing climate, strengthen the ability for you all to meet those challenges. Resilient development on a policy scale is to make sure that new construction, renovations, and infrastructure are built to withstand the storms and the more hazardous events that are sure to come again. And then, very simply put, protecting our trees. We have had so many amazing conversations with folks about their relationship to trees on these different islands. Like, this is a really special thing here. Talking to folks who are, in their elder years, talking about the landscape as they used to know it, the streets, every single time. And there used to be that tree there, and I used to go there, and I used to get fruit with my brother. And this is, the mahogany that you have that is native to here, the trees that were planted by the Africans who were kidnapped and brought here on boats for slavery. I mean, it is an amazing sort of tapestry of stories and spirituality in the trees that you have. And the good news is that if we plant more and if we preserve the trees that we have, we're also addressing issues around climate change. Trees are magic. They sequester carbon, they hold stormwater from the ground, they provide shade, they reduce the temperature, they do all these things just by being what they are. So this is going to be important in our policy work. Next slide, please. Building economic opportunity and resilience. Our policies will look to diversify the U.S. Virgin Island economy and build on the strengths and the opportunities specific to the different islands. All the different islands have different opportunities. Very clear to us at this point that that is the case. Opportunities for everyone as a policy directive is to prioritize policies that expand opportunity, again, for access to capital. We talked about the homeowners' issues around access to capital. We have to make sure that our local business owners and our local entrepreneurs, I don't think I've ever seen such an entrepreneurial community as I see on these islands. It is amazing. Everybody's got 4 or 5 things going at once, and they just keep moving. You all need access to capital to make those ideas grow and to turn those into something bigger. Growing your food economy. As I said, there's an exciting discussion going on here on St. Croix about food growth, about food production, about food processing, about distribution and service and waste, and using food waste in a way that is actually not a problem and a liability, using it as an asset within that system, creating a circular food system and an economy that really makes you stronger here in so many ways. The numbers that we're hearing is that the U.S. Virgin Island gets 97% of its food from off-island. Right? That's not a great number for a place that can at times be cut off from the rest of the world for weeks at a time, depending on what happens. And I also heard that not only are you getting 97% of your food, but you're getting 97% of the things that it takes to grow your food here from off island as well. So you need a system that supports something that can really, build on the interest and the momentum that you have going here. Next, please. Just a couple more. Sustainability and stewardship. This is where we get into the idea of infrastructure. So building infrastructure, providing everyday services to residents and businesses in an equitable and sustainable manner. So that means infrastructure that can last, and that means infrastructure that serves our most vulnerable population. And it'll serve the needs of current and future residents and visitors while promoting biodiversity, not harming biodiversity, restoring ecosystems in the environment, and improving public health, not harming public health. Resilient power as a policy, continuing to build a more resilient and reliable power grid, breaking up the centralization of the grid that you have now, install microgrids, battery storage, bury utilities, use composite poles instead of wood, piece by piece, creating a more reliable system than what you have now. Water supply, adopting and development standards and design infrastructure to make sure you treat, store, and conserve water supply. St. Croix has to address this water issue if you want that agricultural economy, if you want a sustainable future for future generations. Last slide, please, for me. Development, redevelopment, restoration, and conservation. So this is where it all comes together. This is why this is a land and water use plan. When we talk about sustainability, connecting people from point A to point B, providing homes that are safe and affordable, we have to talk about where we're going to do these different things. Where is it appropriate to build? Where is it appropriate to restore? Where is it appropriate to leave it alone and leave it just as it is? These are sort of the big picture questions that are going to come together as we go forward with this plan. So we'll have areas that are suitable, we'll identify areas that are suitable for different types of development and uses, areas that are most in need of conservation, and areas that should be targeted for restoration, both in land and water. And creating walkable mixed-use communities is another example of a policy in this area. Establishing zoning and incentives for mixed-use development that creates places where people can gather and walk and feel safe and access everything from retail to services. So it's not simply, a port of call that receives visitors who can come and spend money in the daytime and then go home. It's a place for you all to go and spend some money or not, or just gather with your friends and meet up or see your doctor or your dentist or your grandma, whatever that may be, putting that all in one place in different pockets throughout the islands. So that's an overview of the 10 things that you will look at on the boards this evening. The plan is starting to take shape, right? We're about halfway through at this point. From here on out, we'll hear, we've heard a lot on St. Thomas. We were on St. John last night. We'll hear a lot tonight. We're excited to hear more. This is all going to continue to sort of crystallize at the level we're at now, but then we're going to dive in. So for the rest of the summer and headed into the fall, we'll really be kicking into these things. We're going to come back to you. We're going to show you more work, more specific work, more work that is specific to St. Croix. And we'll be doing that for, again, all the 3 major islands. But that's where we stand. So I'm going to have my colleague Krista do one slide that's going to talk about how to view and go through the material that you have here, and then I'll come back to the mic, and if anybody wants to have a little discussion here where we're sitting, we can do that before we head out to the stations. Krista, give me the board.
Good evening. I'll stand up a little. So it's a lot. Thank you. Thank you. So yes, a lot of information. We can all just take a deep breath. So how you can provide your feedback to us. So we have some worksheets. If you've been walking around, you've seen them on the tables. And I can explain the boards and how they'll work together. So each board has our formative issue. In the colored box is our guiding principle, and then in the bold are all of the policies, and under them are the example working strategies that we have. And we've numbered all of the policies. They're not numbered in any priority. They're really just to help you give us feedback. So if you have feedback on policy like number 3, you can write policy number 3 on the sheet, and you can give us, do you agree or disagree, or you can provide some more detail. Are we missing something, or if you like something, more emphasis on something, making, because we only have a couple strategies here, are there other strategies that you would like us to make sure we include, that we sort of do more investigation on? So you can fill these out this evening, and you can leave them where you signed in this morning. You can also provide them to someone who has a name tag. We'll collect them for you as well. If you need more time, you can take them with you, and you can bring them to DPNR's office in Frederiksted. And if you need more time, you can also go online and provide, if you want to type your comments, there's a survey form on there, so you can pick exactly what formative issue. You don't have to go through all of them, so you can really focus if there's something that's of particular interest to you. And with that, I will also, if you have any questions about this, you can ask Nate and I can respond as well. But that's it. Thank you.
So maybe one last comment on that. Just for the purposes of this evening, this is a lot of material. Give whatever feedback you feel comfortable giving. We have other ways for you to re-engage with this on the website, as Krista mentioned. So, don't feel super pressured to get through everything. Do as much as you want, do as much as you can, do as much as you're comfortable with.
I forgot something kind of important. And so till August 6th. So if you are going to go online, that will be available till August 6th. Kind of an important detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. So it's the time of the evening when we can go, and anybody that you see with a name tag is going to be at these 10 different stations. There's 2 identical posters at each station because we figured it might get a little crowded. But before that, I wanted to give anyone an opportunity to ask me any questions about the process, or the material, or moving forward, whatever that may be. Please, anybody. Okay, we do have a mic too that we're going to try to pass around. Okay, so Nicole, I'm going to have you be in charge of choosing people with hands. Good afternoon, sir.
One of my major questions that I would like to ask, the development of the land and water use plan, is there going to be one cut development for all 3 islands, or there's going to be different areas, should I say? Because the islands are all unique in their own way. In other words, is the land and water use for St. Croix going to be the same thing for the land and water use in St. Thomas?
No, it will not be the same.
This is one of my major questions I wanted to ask.
Yes.
Because I can recognize that the islands have their own uniqueness.
Yes.
And in your development of these plans, that has to be taken into consideration.
Absolutely.
Now, my other major question that I want to ask, once this plan has been developed, the life duration of it only lasts until the end of this administration?
No, sir.
I hope you understand where I'm coming from on that. Because we have had ideas develop of different things. Mm-hmm. And then, as an administration comes into play, that goes out of the door.
Yes, no, that is absolutely true, and you are not the only place that we've seen this happen. And so the trick for us, well, the first trick is to get it adopted, right? So that is going to be its own challenge, that we have to get this adopted. And the other piece of this is to build in mechanisms that are meant to outlast the existing administration. So for example, if you have, I talked about requests for a zoning change. If this is adopted by the legislation as law, then, and they have to answer to this plan in order to make a zoning change, for example, or to make other important decisions, then the only way that they can remove that from one administration to the next is to change that law. We can't stop people from changing laws, but we can stop people from putting it on a shelf once an administration changes, and that's by making it law when this gets adopted. So that is how this is going to be carried from one administration to the next.
I have one last question, so if you would just bear with me. My question is, for establishments that have been established in certain areas and they are not in harmony with the new plan, what happens there?
So I'll tell you what happens in other places because we're not there yet. But when you create a plan, what typically happens, and you say, okay, this area over here, we want it to be just residential, right? So this is a neighborhood, it's already a neighborhood, and we want it to be just residential. But it just so happens that 50 years ago, somebody built an auto body shop in the middle of that neighborhood, and it's been there for 40 years, and the neighbors sort of deal with it, but it wouldn't, maybe it would be nice if it kind of went away. So like that's an example of something that can happen. And so if this land use plan comes forward and says, this is a residential area, and in residential areas, we're not going to have auto body shops. That auto body shop, usually by law, gets to continue to operate as it is because the owner has rights to that operation for as long as the owner operates it. The owner can't expand it, the owner can't intensify it, and when the owner gives up on that property, then it ceases to be. Someone else cannot come along. So sometimes that change takes a little while to bear fruit because you're sort of honoring the rights that somebody's had for maybe a family business or something like that. That's one example. But that's usually how that happens. It takes place over time. Nicole?
Good evening.
Oh, good evening, sir.
First of all, I would like to say congratulations to Just Right Trucking, where we override the governor's veto. The Rastafari. Hello, 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 hello. Sound like the music we listen to all the time. Sir, yes, as I said, congratulations to Just Right. We override the governor's veto. Okay, so now we will be building our block plans. It's interesting that one of the open topics that you have here is build economic opportunity and resilience. Well, we've been doing that and campaigning for 4 months against DPNR in that policy. Now, sir, would you agree with me that this what you have right here is a draft? Is it a draft or this is a working document?
That's a draft.
Okay. In this draft, would you agree with me that 90% of what you have spoke about does not reflect St. Thomas and St. John? You see, you're talking about St. Croix in this here. Period.
No, I would not. I don't think I would agree with that statement.
And then why you interject when you're speaking regarding this period, build economic opportunity. You use the word specific island, but it's not written in here. You have to interject it in there. Because when I read it, I assumed you're talking about all 3 islands. But each island would not be applicable to some of these in here. Am I correct?
That may be the case, and that's certainly the feedback that we're looking for.
Okay, thank you very much. And you used the word, if I'm correct, where you said that, what timeline do you have when this will be completed and will be able to go to the legislature for ratification?
Early 2024.
Early 2024?
Yes.
That's very quick, because this is comprehensive.
Yes, it is.
Well, no problem. We look forward for that aspect, and I want to thank you very much. And congratulations again, Just Right, for your concrete back plan.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ryan Flegel. Thank you very much for taking the time to go through the process with people, with all of us. I really appreciate it. I think that I wanted to bring up something that isn't on the boards here, and that I think is really important in what we look at for a comprehensive land and water use plan, and that is, what size population are we planning for? And so I think because this is an issue that's gotten a lot of talk thus far, and it's something that we have been able to be reasonably complacent about, because the population of St. Croix hasn't changed as dramatically as it has in other places. Fluctuations of the population, but it hasn't changed as dramatically as it has some places on the planet. But as we get to a place where we've got 8 billion people on the planet, I think the pressures on beautiful islands like St. Croix and St. Thomas and St. John are going to increase with population, and we're going to see a big change in the number of people that are moving to these islands. So I think that when we create the comprehensive land and water use plan, we should be looking at how many people are we planning for, and what are we doing with provisions for permitting and zoning and land use that affect this, either to restrict the number of people that move to the islands or to encourage it. And maybe we want to do some encouraging, but not a lot of encouraging. But I think it's something that we should be planning for. So, for example, if we had the same population density as St. Thomas, the population here would be about 120,000 people. That's 3 times more than we have right now. And if we have a population of 120,000 people on this island, how are we going to provide sewer treatment and power with Bapa the way it is? What's going to happen when we drive past Sunny Isle during the day, and how is the island going to function very well? So I want to really look at what can we do to encourage and discourage population growth, depending on what the community wants. But I think it should be part of the discussion in a really good way. And we look at like sustainable development and even development at all, and there are things that we can do to like grow, and that's kind of normally the mantra of everyone, because everyone looks at growth as something we can all support. And some growth is really good, but some growth can harm us in ways that we don't necessarily look at or find. So I'm hoping that this can become part of the plan. And the last part of all that is that, like, I just think that, like, right now we have parcels already divided in St. Croix to basically accommodate a population growth like I've spoken of. And we don't really have development standards that will talk about what happens if all those parcels get developed in the way that they've already been divided. And we have provisions in place for increased subdividing in the future and so forth. So as we look at, like, how does this work, I just want to make sure that we factor that in. Thank you very much for considering this and for working on all the issues that are involved in this.
Thank you.
In the front.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening, DPNR, Commissioner Oriole, and staff, and commendations to you on this Herculean effort and task. My question is one that I asked before, and I'm hoping that I can get some greater degree of specificity, and by the way, I'm Alicia Barnes. Where you have gotten thus far in terms of what you've presented, what level of collaboration have you had with other government agencies, and what level of input have you gleaned from previous initiatives in this regard? I see former Senate President Lucy Richards here, who was instrumental with the development law When I served as commissioner, we had the form-based code, we had amendments to the zoning code. So I'm trying to understand the level of collaboration that you have, again, engaged with the process thus far, or what is your plan to do that?
We've had quite a bit of collaboration in the current government agencies, and with regard to the development code, the blueprint over on St. Thomas, the form-based code, all of those items, we are very aware of the content of that material, and we think that's going to be very instrumental. We've taken a little bit of a step back from that because we want to get back to that point. But there's been quite a bit of discussion and collaboration about those. They've been very informative of the material that you see today, and they're going to be more so as we go into the actual drafting and getting to the level of specificity that those documents have.
Okay, if I may?
Yes.
Okay, because my concern is that I don't want us to start from scratch, because there's been significant effort, even in terms of water use, catchment, stormwater. So I just want to ensure, because in looking at your presentation, it seems, let me try to find the correct word, it just seems relatively basic. And I know that there is so much more meat that could be added to the bone based on what has been done already. So I just have some concerns if in fact that level of collaboration is actually being exercised. Like when you reference the probate law, I know the 32nd legislature passed significant amendments to the probate law. So I just want to ensure that you are in fact getting your hands on the right set of information. And Commissioner, if I may say that you have an excellent staff, and they could also be available to field some of these questions, because the probate question, or as it relates to the pre-existing non-conforming use, Ms. Leah Laplace from CCZP could probably provide better clarity than what we got. So, thank you.
Mike?
Thank you.
Anyone else before we?
Hi, good evening. My name is Young Baker. Just moved in a couple years ago here, and I really enjoyed the sanctuary. I have a question about the Celebrate Our History in Focal Park. And the last paragraph is extensive testings, which is technologies and facilitating research, preservation, and all these things that you're asking. I'm just wondering how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, cost is a big issue moving this plan forward. There's no question about it. That's one example. The core, and not to divert from your question, but like sort of the core issue around governance and staffing, the costs associated with that are going to be a big issue to tackle. So we recognize the challenge there, and a lot of these we're going to have to start identifying funding sources where we can incorporate that into the work that we're doing. But your point is well taken. A lot of these strategies that you see here are going to cost money that's not allocated now, and that's part of why we need to set these policies to shift that direction.
Of money. I happen to be on this property. I think this is a blessing for me and my husband was not here. It was once lived by Denmark, king and queen, and now it is also but anyway, history go back, and then we found there's a tombstone of Alexander Hamilton's mother who'd been married and died on the property. So this is a great property, and we wanted to introduce to the St. Croix or any locals and the children in school to learn of the history of the property. And we started doing this and changing the zoning And guess what? We haven't received a letter. It said that we have to have the scientific archaeologist, Mr. Bremen, I think that's his name, I can't remember. Yeah. That's the process. David Bremen, yes. So he said that we have to do that, and just giving us 2 resources to contact. And guess what I did? I contacted them, a man in New York City, and he said it will take $10,000 for him and his crew to come down and check on the archaeology site. It's my money. It's out of my pocket. And I want to serve these people. Is this right for me?
Yes, it is. That's the process.
Yeah. I'm just looking at your proposal. It doesn't blow my mind. How much money out of my pocket to serve these people? And I think this is not right. And so I even sent him an email. I said, well, why don't we get people from Puerto Rico? And he hasn't responded for me for about a week. So I don't know.
Okay, well, when we get to the point later in this plan where we're identifying actions, there cannot be a burden on existing, there cannot be an unreasonable, an unreasonable financial burden on property owners, existing property owners, cannot be at the foundation of this plan. It's just not going to work if that's the case. So strategies need to have funding and support that doesn't pick pockets of people who are trying to get by and trying to prosper. So that's where we need to head. Yes, miss. Good evening.
Good evening. First off, I just want to say that I'm hopeful that this is going to be the one, right? This is going to be the effort that leads to a lot of meaningful legislation, and that we get the legislators to the table. My 2 points. One is a comment around information. So there's been a lot of legislation over a period, even after last legislature. In fact, we have now a requirement that we move forward with making our community walkable. So what would be important for the public to also have is access to that information. So on the Plan USVI site, why don't we have a compilation of the laws over many legislatures, many periods of actual legislation, as for those of us who are interested in reading that, but also as we move forward with the plan. The other item is sort of our really important issues. We have a sargassum crisis, where it actually impacts our health. You don't hear a lot talk about it, but it has a very negative impact to our health, and definitely to marine life, which many are quite aware. So being able to, I think, also, as the plan goes forward, really coordinating with all of our entities that deal with that, CCN, Historic Conservation, on, and developing really an effort where, through not just these town halls, but we're having some other meaningful internal meetings where we're bringing folks in the working group. We have our meetings, which I hope you serve on, and it's been a good experience, but also us getting into some other smaller work groups where we're bringing folks together, have internal meetings. We're bringing the legislators, bringing the senators and their staff, bringing them to the table, not waiting to just send the senators in January and say, hey, this is all of our legislation, but also encouraging them that they're going to have to put the work in it. They're going to show up, bring their staff, bring the persons who are part of the legislature, so that we have a meaningful, robust effort for the, meeting into this legislature, to the next one, and going forward. So we continue to see like a effort where we can have a series of laws passed and actually taken by the executive branch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nanette asked, does anyone in the staff, or do you know how many estates we have on the island of St. Croix?
I do not know the number of states we have on St. Croix.
You don't know?
I don't know off the top of my head, no.
Do you know how much of this island is amenable to livestock farming?
Not a measurement, no. We have quite a bit of information like that in our opening reports, but please.
Well, I've read the information, and I don't recall anything about helping local people to own land that
just might become agriculturally productive. But I don't see anything that alludes to the productivity of the people who history and culture we are assuming we should celebrate. We, for instance, dispose of more than 3 gallons of fresh water here every day. Do we speak to that?
Yes, we will speak to that.
When?
When we get into our technical phases of this, when we start drafting all of the strategies. Absolutely.
Maybe I'll just leave it there because I have a lot of questions and I don't think that maybe we're at the right level yet.
It's
Right stage. Maybe in August, you think?
We'll be working on this. Our next round of big visits is going to be in November. And so when we come back at that time, there'll be a lot more detail to look at.
I'll leave you with this. In terms of land, and when I hear land, I think of land development for us who live it.
Mm-hmm.
It was 1881, 3 years after what was become to be known as the Great Firebug. The Danish government gave what is today a state work and rest to what they called reliable Negro overseers. Why? Because land was and still is desperately needed by the people whose history and culture we purport to celebrate. And we have no means of getting this land because it just becomes less and less affordable with really every month. It was, I think, in 1929 that they tell us that there was a thing called the Great Depression. And the President of the United States came through here and called this place an effective poorhouse. Then the following president said, well, people need to have land. We had a homestead program. Maybe some of us in here familiar with the name Danley Peterson. I'm hearing this. That is what comes to me when I hear of comprehensive land and water use program. Who are we planning for? We don't even know how many estates we have. We don't know how much land is available for grazing, for crop farming, maybe poultry. What are we planning for? But I'll leave it at that because I see we're not at that level, we're not at that stage yet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a comment more than a question. Once we pass this land use plan, which we have been working on for about 50 years, or 48 years, what's going to prevent our legislature from overriding
Nothing.
special requests for special zoning and whatnot?
Nothing.
Commissioner, that's a question to you, not a question but a comment, just because, you know, what happened today, for example, where the legislature granted a variance in an area that was not, in my opinion, suitable. And so all this effort and all this energy to go into a land use plan, which we really need, is for naught. If 14 or 11 senators can say, oh, well, we'll give them a zoning variance. Well, so how does that change? I just want to know. Do we have to change the legislation?
So it would be legislative change. So remember, the
issue of zoning change was not always in the hands of the legislature. In the early part, it actually used to be part of a planning board here in the territory, and you had different members that comprised the board, members made up of the people of the Virgin Islands as well. We have a number of committees and commissions that mimic that right now. But in the late 80s, early 90s, when there was a change in the law, that's how the legislator became the determination, or the body that made the final determination on whether or not a zoning change would take effect. So as part of this process, because we have heard it for several legislatures now, that the legislature, you know, when it's an easy decision, where it's a home-based business, that, you know, of course, this is a no-brainer. Like, why are we even having this at that level? Why isn't something that the commissioner can take care of or something like that? Then when there starts to be a decision that becomes a little bit more difficult or a little bit more political because there's a lot more people involved in that, now it's, oh, DPNR didn't do their job, right? And so, of course, I don't have to politic for votes in my role as Commissioner of the Department of Planning and Natural Resources. There's a body that has a determining factor that has to politic for their role in the government of the Virgin Islands and how we do things. So we can, in fact, remove that decision-making from that body if that's the will of what we want. We can say that a planning board can be reestablished. It's getting more and more difficult to actually get people on boards and commissions nowadays, if we're being honest. So what we can also say is that maybe it's put in the hands of, let's say, the Coastal Zone Management Commission. Because again, there's an established body that looks at development, it looks at land use, it looks at activities and uses across the territory, and it's already established. And so those are the types of things that we can actually say as part of this legislation. You know what? Option A is to no longer have zoning variances, zoning determinations, zoning changes to be left at the hands of the legislature. We want to see that put back into a separate board that is based off of an administrative process, public input, just like it is currently. And then now, if in fact that board, somebody still has a differing opinion, they have the right to appeal through an administrative process, even judicial after that. So we have that option. And we can say we no longer want it to be in this particular realm for the final decision, but rather we want to return it to a planning board here in the territory. Okay?
Yes, and you know how it does have to come from the legislature, and they do have to.
But again, it's your legislature is supposed to serve you. And so if in fact that we see that, hey, these determinations, this is something that the people say this needs to be a separate board, then that's how it goes up to the legislature, because they are there to serve. So with that, I'm going to ask that we please get to the boards, because we do, in fact, need your input. We really, really want to get... Well, so, okay. 10 more minutes. 10 more minutes.
What's the process? What? Sorry. We had somebody who was going to ask a question. Oh, yeah, sorry. I just want to know what's the... Come back to you. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, my name is Ford Franklin. My wife and I have been here a little over a year and a half.
3, 4.
I just want to pick up on something that we heard mentioned on the boards over there in the corner, and that's bicycle paths. You can guess I'm a cyclist. I enjoy getting out on the bike. For recreation and fitness, certainly. But before we came down here, I used it a lot for transportation. If I could run an errand on the bicycle instead of the car, I would do so. And I'd like to do that here, but I don't feel entirely safe. I do get out some, but it's very limited. And I would love to see bicycle, even if it's just a wide paved shoulder on one side of the road, that would be a start. Ideally, it would be a lane about half, 2/3 of a highway lane and separated by some space or a Jersey barrier or something. And just give it an opportunity to get out and ride. Granted, I'm just me right now, but I'm sure there's a lot of people around the island that would think the same and act the same, given the opportunity and the infrastructure to get out there on their bicycles. Every trip, it takes one car off the road and that much less pollution and places to park, and it really adds up. And I think with the facilities, we'd see a lot more people on bicycles, which would make transportation as a whole better and save the air. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Good evening.
I didn't want to use that man.
Good evening. My name is Lucy Richards. I thought that I would just be a grateful listener this evening. But some of the commentaries, particularly given your response, Commissioner, requires some, at least in my mind, some addressing. I think usually we don't have to qualify ourselves, so I would qualify myself as one that was a member of the Virgin Islands Planning Council under the leadership then of the Tom Blake Sr., Ed Phillips, Ray Adams, and a member of the first draft of the Land and Water Use Plan that was married with a comprehensive policy plan. And I wanted to just listen because I'm trying to find out how we develop the goals and objectives of a land and water use plan without defining our policies, which is our purpose and our reason for education, for healthcare, for agriculture. How do we find ourselves down that road? But I rise to make some response to the inquiry about the Senate. And as a former member of that body, I take great exception to the implication that the representatives of people in the Virgin Islands don't have a capacity to make a decision. I take great exception to that. Particularly since if you don't have the understanding of the structure of governance under this quote-unquote so-called U.S. government of, what do you call it, representative government? Right. Name me a state where you don't have a level of government, because we got a unicameral body. Right. You got state senate, you got house, you got county commissioners, you got city council. You run down the line about 10, 12 levels of local government. And in some of those states, what they use now to control, they call them HOAs. I know, I own a house in one of them. Homeowners Association. So we have to be careful in the implication that our elected representatives and senators That is us are responsible for the political array or disarray, whichever one you want to give the color to, that exists today. But don't leave the impression that because they do what you wanted to do, that they should not be the entity. So not them, then who? If not us, then who?
DPNR.
The DPNR has exhibited in some instances, not you as an agency, but the committees and commissions that you have, political influence. Right now, I'm just granting a CCM permit for looking at Ray's house. Don't tell me these people are individuals that have these competence to not look at these things.
That's right.
I'm very sorry I had to grab the mic, but I'm glad. Because some of these things need to be said to some of us who are sitting and listening. I was going to be a listener. But I think that sometimes somebody will speak. And some of us have to, I can't wait till they get to the point of having this piece of paper or these groups of papers put together as one document, as a plan to get to the point where we as a people have our elected representatives act on it. That's going to be, I suspect that'll be the appropriate time for me to finish talking, so I want to talk. Okay? You check on my career.
All right, folks, I noticed that we've lost a few. I'm hoping that, it was not because they were hoping to get to the board. So I know there are a bunch of people here who do want to have an opportunity to review the material. So if we could have folks go to the boards and talk with anybody who has a name tag, we can wrap up the evening. Thank you.